The Florida Gators might have the best roster building philosophy in the entire country.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Monday. I am Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with New York Giants on SI. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And today we're talking about the Florida Gators roster building process, because I will say, I don't know if they necessarily execute it perfectly, but I do think just on paper, the Florida Gators build this roster the right way. I mean, look, I'm on record saying that Florida should be a college football playoff team this year. And I'm also on record saying that I'm not super confident in the coaching staff at times, right? The reason for that is because I do think that they've done a fantastic job building the roster, and it's just up to the actual coaching to do their job. The roster is there. This is a roster that really doesn't have any glaring weaknesses, any glaring holes on the roster. They did a fantastic job there. And I think that when we talk about actually getting this roster together and the philosophy here, Florida's been ahead of the curve with quite a few things. And honestly, there have been things that we've spoken about before where people are skeptical of, and it turns out that, hey, Florida kind of knew what they were doing with some of these things. Like having the army of staffers that they have, that now as rules changed and you've got more freedom, you've got guys that have been established at Florida that have been around the program, that know what to do and know how to help build this team. And it's not about, okay, well, we're allowed to have more people, let's go hire a bunch now. It's that, hey, we've always been able to have them as analysts or whatever off-field roles we have. Now they get to be more involved. And so they were kind of ahead of the curve with stuff like that. When Billy Napier was at Media Days last week, SEC Media Days were all last week. He was there on Wednesday with DJ Lagway, Jake Slaughter, and Caleb Banks. And when Billy Napier was asked about revenue sharing and all that fun stuff, and revenue sharing, by the way, if you don't know, is schools are going to be able to pay athletes directly. Each school is going to have about $20 million. That's like 21 that they can spend on athletes. There have been different approaches and different thoughts of how schools will spend that. There are going to be some schools who, if football brings in 80% of the revenue, then football is going to be allowed to spend 80% of that revenue sharing cap that schools have. There's some schools that are going to do it differently, and some schools, who knows what they're going to do, right? There's going to be different approaches here. We've seen some proposals of kind of restricting or setting a guideline for what schools can do, but until that's actually put in place, who knows, right? But with revenue sharing, NIL doesn't go away. Revenue sharing is what schools can pay players directly. NIL is what collectives and what, I mean, when we have Hayden Hansen on the show, that's an NIL deal and things like that. Like there's going to be still NIL, but there's supposed to be an NIL clearinghouse that will, say, hey, this deal is legitimate. I don't really know how they're going to dictate value. But if there's a deal more than $600 worth of NIL, it needs to go through this NIL clearinghouse and get approved. And again, I really don't know how they're going to dictate all of that stuff. Because at what point, because I do know that they're supposed to be saying, hey, too much money. At what point are you allowed to tell a business that wants to pay a player, let's say $25,000, if you want to pay a player that, who is this clearinghouse to dictate, no, you can't do that? So I think that's a really gray area. It's really just muddied over there. They're still figuring that out. But schools are going to need to figure out how they're spending revenue sharing and NIL usage. And people keep talking about revenue sharing as a cap. And on Wednesday, when Billy Napier was at Media Days last week, he was asked about the revenue sharing cap. And he actually came out and said something that I thought was really interesting. He was the first coach I've heard talk about it this way, but I do think that's a great way to look at it, where he said, we don't really look at it like a cap. We look at it more like a budget. So when we've all been talking about NIL as, NFL salary cap, NBA salary cap, all that, he kind of meant, or he kind of said that it's more of a budget, so you can think of baseball or if you're a soccer fan, you can think of it like, I'm not a big soccer guy, but where it's basically, hey, you spend what you have or you spend what you want to spend, and that's it. And I think that the way that you can get around that is determining who gets revenue sharing, who gets NIL usage. And a common example I've used, and if you've been in the Twitter spaces with us, we've had these conversations before. A common a common example that I bring up is DJ Lagway, right? Because DJ Lagway can get any amount of money, right? And no one's going to be able to say, hey, you're not worth this. And no one's going to be able to say, hey, DJ Lagway, you're not worth this amount of money that they want to pay you. That hype that you have as maybe being the best quarterback in the country this year. Nope, you're not allowed to have that. Your 100-something thousand followers on Instagram, I don't know if you're on TikTok, you're a bunch of followers on Twitter, all that stuff. You're not allowed to dictate. No, this is the Gatorade National Player of the Year who's done Gatorade commercials. He's done them. He's been on Gatorade commercials in the Western Conference Finals. We've seen him. In the NBA Finals, we've seen him. All that stuff. Like you've seen him do that. Who is an NIL clearinghouse to say you're not worth this amount of money, right? So maybe teams take the approach of saying, hey, I'm going to use revenue sharing on the younger players, the incoming freshmen, right? I'm going to give, I'm going to give Will Griffin this amount of money from revenue sharing before an NIL clearing, where an NIL clearinghouse can't say, hey, can't do this. I'm going to give them revenue sharing where an NIL clearinghouse can't say anything about it. So maybe that's the approach, right? That would be the approach that I think would be effective. But it's an interesting approach to NIL budget versus cap, because revenue sharing, sure, we could spend this amount of money on players from revenue sharing, but that's not a cap. That's just what we're allowed to spend in that. That's our allowance, basically. That's what we could spend it on. NIL usage, if I give DJ Lagway, Caleb Banks, Jake Slaughter an All-American, you're going to tell an All-American he can't make this amount of money? Come on now. So things like that, the distribution is going to be really interesting to me, but I do like Napier's comments about it being a budget and not a cap. I think that's probably a more accurate way to put it, right? And you will see teams with this revenue sharing and NIL usage trying to figure all that out. You will see teams try to focus on premium position spending, right? And this is the thing that we talked about with Florida, with all the front office hires that they had. Benjamin Elster, who's very analytically sound, the Nick Folk from the Falcons, he was their cap guy for a while. You will see, and again, Nick Folk, of course, when he was with the Falcons, was working under Thomas Dimitroff, who Thomas Dimitroff is the reason that I talk about premium positions so much of, hey, quarterback, wide receiver, offensive tackle, outside corner, and pass rusher. We're going to spend more money there. Look at where Florida's strong. We'll talk about the building blocks later this week, but look at where they're strong. It's spots like that, right? They've got their pass rushers. They've got their quarterback. They've always had receivers coming in and out. Like, they've been adding to the offensive tackle room. They've been adding to corner. They've been building through that way. And I think that's the way to win. Look at all the national champions. Look at where they've been strong. Ohio State this past year. NFL QB. Wasn't a high draft pick, but an NFL quarterback. Receivers, they've never been dry there. Offensive tackle, they've had guys, I think they had one first-round pick this year at offensive tackle. Pass rushers, they've always had at Ohio State. They've done a great job there. Corners, they do. I think they're an underrated corner school. I don't think people give them enough credit for that. But look at the national champions. and they are good at those spots, aside from Michigan. Michigan was stylistically just different. Still, though, top 10 pick at QB. Still good offensive line. Still, Roman Wilson went to the NFL. They've had a few NFL receivers on that team. They just weren't, elite college players. Corners, great. They've done it on pass rushers, great. Like, they've done that. That's been the approach, and Florida has taken that approach since Napier got here. They've just gotten better at it. And Napier also mentioned the style of recruiting and the approach of recruiting. And we've talked about that quite a bit lately because I do think it's most prevalent in this class. We're going to talk about it even more when we get back with Locked On Gators. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and all of your spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year with monarchmoney.com. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever the podcast and on YouTube. And I mentioned, recruiting has been more prevalent in the way that they've taken. And because this has always been that you can go back to, year 2 under Napier, right? When things started going poorly as far as when they ended the season on that big, I think it was 5-game losing streak that I spoke about with recruiting. And I said, look, I like the way that Florida is recruiting in the sense, or I respect the way that Florida is recruiting in the sense of getting guys with the traits that you can't teach and then banking on your development. That's always been a thing with Billy Napier and his coaching staff is banking on development. Maybe earlier on while they were kind of cutting their teeth and trying to prove themselves, maybe earlier on it was out of need. Now it's out of desire. Now it's what they're looking for. Like maybe earlier on they needed to take guys that are just good athletes that they can develop and prove themselves. But Billy Napier mentioned during his Wednesday media session, I forgot who it was that asked the question, but he mentioned, we're not recruiting good college football players. That's not what we're doing. We're recruiting NFL draft picks. And I love that approach. And again, I think I've said this before, especially in recent weeks. I think this is more prevalent than ever with Florida's 2026 recruiting class, where there's so many guys that Florida takes. And we talk about, hey, they're taking guys that have the physical tools, the physical traits that you can't teach, and they're banking on developing them. And they're teaching them the things that you can teach. They've got the things you can't teach. They're teaching the things you can teach. You can't teach speed. You can't teach height, arm length. You can't teach aggressiveness, okay? You can maybe tell a guy, hey, play more aggressive in this way. But you can't teach aggression. That's a thing that's just in you. It's as simple as like if you're soft, you're soft. You can't teach aggression. It's not possible. But you look at Florida's 2026 recruiting class, and they've been bringing in guys that have the tools that you can't teach. And I know people, I feel like the fan base is relatively torn, I guess, on Will Griffin. But Will Griffin has some of the traits that you've seen Billy Napier try to recruit consistently out of high school. He's got a big arm. He's got athletic ability. But he's also got things that and those are, by the way, things you can't teach. But he's got things that are now becoming more relevant to just football, right? It's not enough to have a big arm and be mobile. You've got to be able to extend plays with your legs. Like that's the thing that we've talked about with Shedeur Sanders when I cover the New York Giants, of course. And when we were talking about the NFL draft with the Giants, Shedeur Sanders was a common name that kept coming up. The Giants were never going to draft him. I said that well before the 2024 season that The Giants are never going to draft him. He's just too flashy for them at quarterback. He's got some things that he's said that I'm like, all right, well, Giants aren't going to take him regardless of what I think of him. They're not touching him. But he's not a bad athlete. He's really not. But he doesn't use his legs enough. Like when he starts moving around, he's great. He really is. But he doesn't do it enough. And so things like that, like Florida's been looking for that. Florida's been recruiting that. Lagway was the most obvious one, right? Jaden Rashada had it. Will Griffin has it. Florida looks for that at quarterback. Running back. They look for guys with elite speed and natural feel for lanes. It's tough, I think, to really improve running back vision. I do. I think it's one of those things that sure comes with experience. But at Florida, if you don't have the vision already, you're not going to get on the field, and so you're not going to get that experience. Receiver, they're looking for height, weight, verified speed. Tight end, they want you to be willing and able to block. They want you to have good athletic traits. They want you to have certain size. Offensive line, they want you to be aggressive as hell, long arms. They're trying to get people with more nimble feet now. One of the reasons that I think Tyler Chukwuem is the best offensive lineman in this Gators commit class. I don't care what anyone says about anything. But bringing in guys that have those traits and working on developing them. All the offensive linemen that we really talked about that have committed for this year, when we've talked about them, we've said, hey, they've got these great physical traits. Hand usage can be a mess at times. Technique can be a mess at times. But that's what Florida's fine with. Like, that's what Rob Sale is like, all right, you know what? Yeah, hand usage might be a mess. Yeah, technique might be a mess. But guess what? We're going to teach them how to do that. But they can already do the things that we can't teach. Like you can improve footwork. You can improve some things. But there's also just at a certain point, you got to go, all right, well, physically, you can't teach it. Like you can't teach speed. I don't know what I ran in a 40. I'm going to be honest. I think we ran one in high school one time. And even then, I don't know what we ran. And I would assume I was actually slower than they said I was. But I was never going to run a 4.4. I was never going to run a 4.3. There's certain things you can't teach. I could have improved my 40 time with technique and sure speed training, but you get capped out at a certain point. That's why Florida's like, we're going to get guys that already have that. We'll get them a little bit faster, but we're going to get guys that are already really fast and make them a little bit faster and make them unguardable. That's what they've been looking for. On the edge, they get guys with bend. They get guys with great first steps. They get guys that can do things you can't teach. Or even if you can improve them and teach them a little bit, you can only improve them so much. It's a fantastic approach. It's what Georgia does. That's why Georgia guys, even if they never really reach their ceiling, there's so many guys with NFL draft cycle. I don't even know if you notice this, but in the NFL draft, there's so many guys that we talk about as, their technique's still a mess, but they're great athletes and they get drafted. And so Florida is going, all right, we're going to treat high school recruiting like this. And it's especially a great approach because you know what you can do at that point? You can take guys that are coming here for development. And you can say, hey, you're probably not going to play early. We'll get you on the field if you earn it, but you're probably not going to play early. But you set the expectation before of we're going to develop you into a really good football player. And Florida's been doing that. They've been taking guys and saying, hey, we're going to develop you into a really good football player. And then they go out there and they do it. And so you kind of set that expectation of you're not going to play early, but you're going to sit here and get developed and get better. And then they go out there and do it. And like Florida gets that selling point. And Florida can say, we've backed it up before, and we'll back it up again. And we'll show you consistently that we can do that. And we can develop you there. Like I've talked about Billy G. Like I don't think Billy G's a great recruiter. I know they've gotten some receivers, but I also know other stuff that's gone on with the receivers. Even the ones they've landed and why they've landed them. But I've always said Billy develops NFL receivers. He teaches you the NFL things. I do think that, I think he's got still, there's still some desirables left out there. We'll say that. But he teaches you how to block as a receiver. He teaches you how to do things the NFL cares about. Because he's like, all right, we'll get guys that are gonna get to the NFL with the athleticism, and then we'll just teach them how to be a bit better. And Florida's done a great job of that. And Florida, again, I realize I'm just hyping up Florida here, but I do think they've done a fantastic job with the roster building process. That's always been the thing that I've hyped up about them, and I'm going to continue doing it. And I do think that another thing they've been doing a great job of is their high school versus portal approach. I think a lot of teams do it poorly. I think Florida does it really damn well. We'll talk about that when we get back with Locked On Gators. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free, whether it's the podcast and on YouTube. And to wrap up today's show, we're still talking about this Florida Gators roster building approach where, and I've said this before, I've said this is the winning way, where you go and you build the bulk of your roster through high school recruiting. Then you use the portal to essentially have it as free agency. And Billy Napier mentioned this as well in media days, where he's like, we're using the portal to address immediate needs. Earlier on in their tenure at Florida, they weren't doing that as much. But look at this past year, the 2025 class, 26 high school enrollees, still waiting on Onis Conan Bounty because he's got to figure out a visa. So you're going to have 27 high school kids. And what did you bring in for immediate needs, right? You brought in Harrison Bailey as a backup quarterback with experience, joins your roster, something you didn't really have. Brought in Michael Caraway Jr. as a versatile defensive back that you can kind of slot in multiple ways. Kofi Asari, an edge rusher from UMass, hopefully take another step. J. Michael Sturdivant, immediate competitor for wide receiver 1 on the team, going to be your starting X this year. Tommy Doman, an immediate punter that's going to be your starter. That's what they've been bringing in. Okay? Guys that have immediate roles. Then you look at the 2024 class, 20 enrollees, and they went more portal heavy there, right? They did. But even then, the context matters. Because while Florida did go, hey, yeah, we're going to bring in guys that address immediate needs, there are still exceptions to that rule. And we've talked about the exceptions to the rule, right? We've talked about, hey, you bring in guys that are either proven productive players or guys that haven't been in college that are thought to be multi-year contributors. Guys that have been in college for 1 year, no more. Last year, Cormani McClain came into the transfer portal. Jason Zandamella came into the transfer portal. Jamrock Grimsley came into the transfer portal. Grayson Howard, Pop Howard, came into the transfer portal. Guys that were all young. Pop Howard came over after his freshman year in South Carolina. Guys that were all young with room to grow, right? And other guys that are going to be multi-year players. Alfonso Allen came over from Baylor. Multi-year player. You've got guys like Devin Manuel, a multi-year flex tackle. George Gums came over. Multi-year edge rusher, multi-year significant contributor, multi-year starter. All right? And then, of course, you had the guys that were the immediate contributors there, the Elijah Badgers, unfortunately, DJ Douglas was an immediate contributor. No, it wasn't a good one, but was an immediate contributor. Tricos Bridges, Chim Dike, Brandon Crenshaw Dixon went to the NFL after 1 year here. Like, you brought in guys that fit that. That's the approach. That's why I criticize how Florida State and Miami have built their rosters. Because I don't think that's a winning strategy to just go, hey, we're going to go into the portal. Name an NFL team that went heavy on free agency and won a Super Bowl that year. I don't mean, they brought in a star player and some backups. I mean the Philadelphia Eagles dream team. Name teams that went really heavy into free agency and then won it in year 1. And I'm putting the caveat of winning it in year 1 because that is very relevant to the transfer portal because you're bringing in guys with a time limit. All right? You're bringing in guys who aren't going to be there for more than 1 year. When has that really worked out? Don't you dare say Ohio State either. because Ohio State did what Florida did this past year. Florida wasn't as active in the portal as many people thought. A lot of people thought, oh, well, you go out and get big names. No, Florida spent a lot of their time and a lot of their resources retaining their roster. Caleb Banks could have gone to the NFL and been a day 2 pick, but he's back in Gainesville. Guys could have left to go get money elsewhere, right? But they're back in Gainesville. Guys could have gone and declared. Jake Slaughter could have gone to the NFL draft. Austin Barber could have gone to the NFL draft. There are multiple guys that could have left and didn't. They were retained. They're back for another year. Like that was a thing that Florida spent a lot of resources on retaining their roster, and I know that they didn't make as many splash additions in the transfer portal as some people wanted, but you kept the core of your roster. Silver, the defensive lineman from Kentucky, that I think went to USC. Don't even remember where he went at this point. But he's someone who, if he was going to come to Florida, would have cost a good amount of NIL, right? Good amount of resources. I'll just say resources. Good amount of resources. Everybody wanted him, right? If you got him, but it meant losing Caleb Banks, would you take him? No, I wouldn't. I don't think many people would. And I'm not saying that it was legitimately that decision, but it was roster retention versus going out to get the big names. And Florida spent a lot of their resources retaining their roster. That's the winning strategy. Do the bulk of your recruiting, or do the bulk of your roster building through high school recruiting. Similar to the NFL, right? The NBA and maybe soccer are spots, and I guess baseball, but they don't have a cap, and neither does soccer. So the NBA is maybe the one cap league where you can go out and spend a ton or bring in free agency additions or trades and go out there and win right away. The NFL, that's not happening. Guys aren't doing it's not happening. Now, you could say it can happen, and sure, it can happen, but has it? Not really, right? Got there, maybe get one guy. And even the NBA, it's when you get a superstar player. Sure. But other leagues, and especially where I guess we'll say, MLB, aside from the Dodgers, which have a super team and over time continue adding to it, then sure. The Mets this year, when they win the World Series, sure, it's going out and getting a big addition like Juan Soto, just saying. It's not going to happen, but let me live, right? So it doesn't happen in football. Football is too much of a team-oriented sport. It's not how it works. You got to have chemistry. You got to have retention. And back to the Ohio State Buckeyes, so much of their money was spent on retaining their roster. I get it. They brought in Will Howard. Sure. They brought in Quinshon Judkins. Sure. They brought in Caleb Downs. Sure. People could talk about those key additions, and sure, I'll give you the credit. But their roster was stacked because of retention. They had a bunch of guys that could have left, gone to the NFL in day 2, day 3 picks, and just called it a day. But they spent a ton of resources on roster retention, and then they just went and got a couple key immediate contributors. That's the way to do it. Not go out there, bring in 20-something guys from the portal, a bunch of starters from other schools, and bring them in and then say, hey, now all you guys just get together and build a championship roster. Doesn't happen. When you have a team like that, when they go and gets tough, they fold. They crumble late in the season. Or you can Florida State approach and just not get off the ground at all for the entire season. The right way of roster building, and there is a right and wrong way. People could say that, oh, well, anybody could do it. No, you could say that. But it's different when you've got a bunch of guys who come in from the portal. You bring in 20-something guys from the portal, right? And sure, a bunch of them could be starters or a bunch of them can be on the 2 deep. Sure. Those guys, when they strap up their helmets, they're not going to war for each other. roster retention allows you to say, hey, this isn't some mercenary that we brought in. This isn't some 1-year rental that we brought in. This is a guy that I've known for 3 years and I'll go to war for. And that's what Florida has. Like, it really is. Like, people could criticize all they want about the coaching staff, but the roster retention, roster building is the right way to do it. And Florida's doing it the right way. And if Florida, by the way, I will say also, if Florida wasn't doing it with the bulk of recruiting through high school and then using the portal as free agency, again, treat high school recruiting like the draft and undrafted free agency. And if Florida wasn't doing it that way, I'd be demolishing them, okay? If Florida wasn't doing it that way and had the start to the season that they had, I'd be saying that they don't do a damn thing right. But they're doing things the right way. And I love how Florida's building a roster, love the approach they're taking, and I do think that it's the best approach. It's just about actually going out there and coaching them up and coaching them to do it. But as far as the roster building, the general manager side of things, great. And I know that there's people that are mad about, losing bidding wars and all that stuff, and that just is what it is. I mean, they've got their values, and that's on them. But as far as the roster building philosophy, doesn't get better than that. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever it's in the podcast and on YouTube. We will be back tomorrow to talk more Florida Gators football for Locked On Gators. I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. I'll see you all next time.